Hello, everyone. In today's story, Officer Tom Reynolds, an experienced police officer, shocks the community when he arrests a woman he believes to be suspicious. But as the truth unfolds, Tom realizes he has made a grave mistake. This dramatic story will not only make you think about bias in society, but also about the journey of change, repentance, and justice. Watch to discover how a wrong decision can lead to valuable lessons and profound awakening. It was a warm afternoon in Lincoln Park, the sun hanging low in the sky and casting long, lazy shadows across the benches. The usual park goers were scattered around, some sitting and chatting on the grass, others jogging along the winding path. Officer Tom Reynolds was familiar with every face that frequented this park. For nearly a decade, he'd been the one patrolling this peaceful suburban neighborhood, knowing the residents, the routines, and the quiet flow of life that defined the area. As a cop, Tom prided himself on being able to read people. Over the years, he'd honed an instinct for knowing when something felt off, when something didn't sit right. He had learned to trust that gut feeling. It had kept him safe in many dangerous situations. But today, something in the air was different. Tom had just finished his last patrol of the day and was about to head back to the station when something caught his eye. A woman sat alone on a bench beneath the sprawling oak tree in the center of the park. At first glance, there was nothing particularly unusual about her. She was reading a book, the pages turning slowly in the gentle breeze. Yet something about her made Tom pause. It wasn't her appearance. She was dressed sharply in a crisp blouse and tailored pants, far more formal than the usual park attire. But there was something in the way she sat, completely at ease, as if she was untouched by the usual noise and bustle of the park. Tom had seen the regulars, the joggers, the families, the dog walkers, but this woman didn't belong in the same category. She was different, and Tom's instincts were on high alert. Tom parked his patrol car at the entrance of the park, his eyes still fixed on the woman. He ran his fingers along the edge of his belt, the cool metal of his holster a familiar comfort. He didn't know why, but he felt a rising unease, an itch under his skin that he couldn't explain. The park was quiet, too quiet. He adjusted his uniform and began walking toward her, his boots crunching softly on the gravel path. As he approached, the woman didn't look up. There was no sign of acknowledgement, no awareness of the approaching officer. She simply continued reading, her face cast in the shadow of the tree. "Excuse me, ma'am," Tom said, his voice firm but polite. "Can I ask what you're doing here?" The woman slowly looked up from her book, her gaze steady and unflinching. There was a calmness in her expression that struck Tom. It was almost as if she had been expecting him all along. "Just enjoying the afternoon," she replied, her tone soft but unyielding. She didn't sound nervous, didn't offer any excuse or explanation. Tom frowned. There was something unsettling about her response. Most people, when confronted by an officer, would explain themselves, perhaps even apologize. But not this woman. She met his gaze directly, almost as though she were studying him. "This park doesn't get much traffic around this time," Tom continued, trying to assert control. "Are you sure you're not waiting for someone?" "No," she answered evenly, folding the corner of the page in her book as she set it down in her lap. "I'm here on my own, just taking in the peace and quiet." Tom's jaw tightened. The woman's composure, her complete lack of fear or anxiety, was starting to get under his skin. She was not acting the way most people did when questioned by an officer. Her calm was unnerving. "I'm going to need to see some identification," he said, his voice more insistent now. She didn't hesitate. Without a word, she reached into her bag and pulled out a small leather wallet. Tom watched as she handed him the ID, and for the briefest moment, he saw the words, FBI. At first, Tom didn't quite register the significance of the ID. It was just a badge, another piece of plastic like so many others. He barely glanced at it before slipping it into his pocket. "Look," he said, his voice hardening, "I'm going to need you to come with me, just to verify this at the station." Her eyes narrowed ever so slightly, but her voice remained calm, unwavering. "I don't believe that's necessary, Officer Reynolds," she said evenly. "You already have my identification." Tom's pride flared. He had been doing his job for years, trusting his instincts, and right now, everything in him screamed that something was off. It didn't matter what the ID said. He needed to follow through, needed to assert control. "I'm just following procedure," he muttered, more to himself than to her. He had already decided. "You'll have to come with me." As she stood up, she didn't resist. She didn't argue. She didn't even seem frustrated, though Tom could sense a quiet disappointment in her demeanor. The drive to the station was tense. The silence between them was thick, and Tom could feel the weight of his decision pressing on him. He had been so sure, so confident that he was doing the right thing. But as he looked at the woman, this calm, collected FBI agent, he felt a gnawing doubt in the pit of his stomach. When they arrived at the station, everything moved quickly. Tom led the woman to the processing desk, but the officers there didn't share his certainty. They were confused. They were concerned. As soon as Captain Bill Monroe saw the woman's ID, his face drained of color. "Reynolds, do you know who you just brought in?" he asked, his voice low, dangerous. Tom swallowed hard, his mind racing. "She said she's FBI. I was just verifying her credentials." Monroe shook his head, disbelief written across his face. "That's Special Agent Maya Collins, one of the top counterterrorism agents in the country. You just detained a federal agent." Tom's heart sank. He had made a colossal mistake. And now, standing there, watching Maya Collins' calm, steady gaze, he knew there was no way to undo what he had done. The hours that followed were a blur. Tom was called into Captain Monroe's office, where the gravity of his mistake fully hit him. Maya had said nothing. She had never fought back, never raised her voice. She simply let the events unfold, watching him with quiet, almost clinical detachment. Captain Monroe's voice was cold as he addressed Tom. "You've made a serious mistake, Reynolds," he said sharply. "This isn't just a minor slip-up. You've overstepped, and it's going to cost you." Tom stood there, unable to speak. He had always prided himself on being a good cop. His instincts had kept him safe time and time again. And now, those instincts had betrayed him. The humiliation was overwhelming. And then, just when he thought it couldn't get worse, Captain Monroe dropped the final blow. "You're on mandatory diversity and sensitivity training," Monroe ordered. "And you're going to work community outreach for the next month. If you're serious about being a better cop, you'll take it seriously." Tom wasn't sure how he ended up at the Southside Community Center. The place was nothing like the sterile environment of the precinct. The walls here were adorned with community murals, faces smiling and laughing. It was a far cry from the intimidating halls of law enforcement. He had no idea what to expect, but the moment he stepped through the door, he was hit with a sense of responsibility he hadn't anticipated. A man with a graying beard and a sturdy build greeted him. Rob, the center's coordinator, extended his hand with a cautious smile. "You must be Officer Reynolds," Rob said, his voice careful but friendly. "We've been expecting you." Tom gave a stiff nod, his eyes scanning the room, where a handful of teenagers were lounging, some on their phones, others talking in hushed tones. It felt like every eye was on him. He walked into the small conference room, where he would be spending the next few weeks. The room wasn't much, four walls, a couple of mismatched chairs, a table covered in pamphlets and flyers. But it was a place where people sought understanding, a place where healing happened. This was what Tom needed now more than ever. The first few days felt awkward. Tom felt like an outsider, like a stranger in a foreign land. He had spent so many years on patrol, enforcing the law, assuming he understood the dynamics of his community. But this was different. These weren't people who feared the law. These were people who had been hurt by it. One afternoon, a group of local teenagers gathered in the center, most of them skeptical of Tom's presence. They had heard of him, of course, the officer who had brought in Maya Collins, an FBI agent on a hunch. The story had spread quickly through the neighborhood. His reputation had taken a hit, and there was no way to undo that. One teenager, a lanky boy named Kyle, gave him a pointed look. "You really think you can fix what you did?" Kyle asked, his voice filled with the anger that had been bubbling in his community for years. "You think a few hours at some community center is going to erase everything you've done to people like me?" The question hit Tom hard. He had no easy answers. He had been trained to answer questions with authority, with facts, with protocols. But here, there were no easy answers. "I don't know," Tom admitted, his voice quiet. "But I'm here to listen, and I'm here to learn." The words felt hollow, but they were all he had to offer. And to his surprise, the teenagers didn't laugh. They didn't dismiss him outright. Slowly, as the weeks passed, they began to open up. One evening, an older woman named Tasha, whose son had been arrested years ago for something as trivial as jaywalking, spoke up. "They don't see us," she said, her voice cracking. "They see skin. They see a stereotype. They don't see our humanity." The first few days felt awkward. Tom felt like an outsider, like a stranger in a foreign land. He had spent so many years on patrol, enforcing the law, assuming he understood the dynamics of his community. But this was different. These weren't people who feared the law. These were people who had been hurt by it. One afternoon, a group of local teenagers gathered in the center, most of them skeptical of Tom's presence. They had heard of him, of course, the officer who had brought in Maya Collins, an FBI agent, on a hunch. The story had spread quickly through the neighborhood. His reputation had taken a hit, and there was no way to undo that. One teenager, a lanky boy named Kyle, gave him a pointed look. "You really think you can fix what you did?" Kyle asked, his voice filled with the anger that had been bubbling in his community for years. "You think a few hours at some community center is going to erase everything you've done to people like me?" The question hit Tom hard. He had no easy answers. He had been trained to answer questions with authority, with facts, with protocols. But here, there were no easy answers. "I don't know," Tom admitted, his voice quiet. "But I'm here to listen, and I'm here to learn." The words felt hollow, but they were all he had to offer. And to his surprise, the teenagers didn't laugh. They didn't dismiss him outright. Slowly, as the weeks passed, they began to open up. One evening, an older woman named Tasha, whose son had been arrested years ago for something as trivial as jaywalking, spoke up. "They don't see us," she said, her voice cracking. "They see skin. They see a stereotype. They don't see our humanity." Tom's throat tightened. He had never thought about it that way. To him, people were just people. But in that moment, he understood how wrong he had been. His decision to arrest Maya hadn't been about her actions. It had been about his assumptions, his biases that he hadn't even known existed.
As time went on, Tom's work at the center began to shift from a mandatory task to something he started to care deeply about. Every session, every conversation forced him to confront the parts of himself that had been hardened by years of policing. The rigidity, the control. He had learned to shut out the humanity of the people he encountered on the streets. Now, for the first time, he was being asked to listen, to feel, and to understand. On one particularly cold evening, after the center had closed, Rob caught up with Tom as he was about to leave. "You've been doing some good work here," Rob said, his tone approving but not overly warm. "People are noticing, but it's not just about showing up. It's about making a real change." Tom nodded, feeling the weight of Rob's words. He knew that this was just the beginning. What mattered now wasn't what he had done in the past. What mattered was what he would do moving forward. He was beginning to see the world not through the lens of authority, but through the eyes of the people who lived in it. 2 months into his outreach work, Tom received a call that he never expected. Maya Collins, the woman he had wrongfully arrested, was in town for an assignment. She asked to meet him. Tom was nervous. He didn't know what to expect from their meeting. Would she be angry? Would she demand an apology? After all, he had humiliated her, dragged her into a situation where she had no business being. But when they met at a small cafe, Maya was nothing like he expected. She was calm, professional, but there was something else in her eyes. "You've been making progress," she said, her voice steady. "I've been hearing about it." Tom exhaled, unsure how to respond. "I don't know if I can ever make up for what I did," he said quietly. "But I'm trying. I really am." Maya nodded, her expression softening. "I know, and that's all anyone can ask of you. Just keep doing the work." They sat in silence for a while, sipping their coffee. Tom realized in that moment that the apology wasn't what Maya needed. What mattered was that he was willing to keep working, to keep listening, and to keep learning. Months passed, and Tom's role in community outreach grew. He began to form real relationships with people he had once overlooked, even feared. He spoke at local meetings, attended neighborhood events, and continued his work at the community center. But it wasn't just about showing up. It was about showing that he was willing to be vulnerable, to admit his mistakes, and to be a part of the solution. He had come a long way from that day in the park when his gut had told him to arrest Maya. Now he knew that his instincts were not always reliable. They were clouded by assumptions. But he was learning to trust a new set of instincts, ones that came from listening, understanding, and facing the truth, no matter how difficult. And although the road ahead would be long, Tom was ready to walk it. He had made his mistakes, but now he was determined to be better, not just for the badge, but for the people he had once overlooked. As Tom left the community center one evening, Rob called after him. "You've done good work here," Rob said with a rare smile. "People are starting to believe in you again." Tom nodded, but he knew it wasn't about being liked. It wasn't about his reputation. What mattered now was the work. The real, difficult work of changing not just the way he saw the world, but the way he interacted with it. As he walked down the street, the city felt different. For the first time in years, he felt like he was actually a part of it.